What's up, everybody? My name is Anbraxas, and this is going to be my guide to how to play Warriors come Mr. Pandaria Patch 5.0 all the way through level 90. Let's get it started. What's up, people? Anbraxas here, and I'm going to be giving you a quick tour of how to play Warrior Mr. Pandaria. Now, you're going to want to pay pretty close attention while I'm talking, because it's going to get in-depth really, really fast. So, if you need to go back and watch things over again, definitely do that. I'll be putting annotations in the video. That way you can skip to certain parts of things I'm talking about if you're a little unclear on things. But, let's get right into it. So, first things first. When you're coming into Mr. Pandaria, Warriors play a heck of a lot different than they do on live. And I'm going to be talking about multiple things before I even start showing you DPS rotations, etc. So I think the first thing I want to note is when you're learning to play a warrior, if you haven't played one in a while or you're just starting, the number one thing you can do, and this counts for playing any class at all, is take a look at your spellbook and take a look and read every single ability thoroughly. Even if you do this on live right now, you'll find that you'll discover some abilities that you've seen and haven't used, or you'll see different ways to increase your damage just a little bit at a time. You'll just be like, let me see if I can find a good example of this. Sorry about that, I had to cough. Let's say like Thunderclap. You know what Thunderclap does in live, but you don't know what it does in Mr. Pandaria, and if you don't look at it, you're going to assume it's the same as it used to be. But currently, Thunderclap actually gives weakened blows, which reduces the physical damage dealt by 10%. You know, that's a pretty significant damage reduction for their side, but you wouldn't necessarily be looking for that if you've been playing Author Cataclysm. So, number one thing you need to do is to open up your spellbook, read each spell very carefully. So, let's talk about what's changed on the Warrior. Well, a lot has changed about the Warrior. First off, Rend is gone. That ability is out of the game. Rend is now built into Bloodthirst. Bloodthirst is a main attack, and basically what it does is you hit somebody, and it puts an ability on them called Deep Wounds. This is what Rend is now, or it is what Rend was on live. Deep Wounds is basically Rend. It's damage over time, bleed effect. And I'm not sure it actually says it in there, but it should be in the passives. Let me check the passive abilities really quick. Deep Wounds passive. Your Mortal Strike, Bloodthirst, and Devastate cause the target to bleed for 40,000 damage over 15 seconds. So, you need to take note of that. Another thing to note is you gain Rage from attacking now. Bloodthirst actually dumps Rage into you. As you see there at the bottom of the talent, it actually says it generates 10 Rage. So that is one major change that's been made to the Warrior. Another major change is actually our stances, and I'm going to go over these real quick and what their applications are. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen that things have changed with the stances, and you're probably not really sure what's going on, what stance you're supposed to be using, etc. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible, but as far as the stances are concerned, we have Battle Stance. Now, Battle Stance is basically a PvE stance. It's not built for PvP, but you can use it in PvP. You can actually use any of your stances at any time. It just depends on your personal preference. Now, the difference between Battle Stance and Berserker Stance is Battle Stance now generates rage from white hits. It generates higher rage from white hits, and you get nothing from being attacked. Now, why would I not consider this a PvP talent, or PvP stance? Simply because a lot of times targets are teleporting around, they're blinking away, deterrencing away, whatever, what have you. They're trying to get away from you because you're a melee character. So, if you're building your rage off of your white hits and you aren't on top of them attacking them with white hits, you're not going to be getting a whole lot of rage in, so that's where Berserker Stance comes in. Berserker Stance is basically the PvP stance for Warriors. And I know I was fighting in Battle Stance for a while, but that was just because the Berserker Stance wasn't giving a lot of rage. But Berserker Stance is most certainly your PvP stance now. So what's the difference between that and Battle Stance? Well, the way Berserker Stance works is you gain some rage from normal melee attacks, and those are your white hits. So if you're just sitting there and you target a target dummy, any white hit will give you a little bit of rage. But in addition to that, any incoming damage will also give you rage. And that's anything from any other character. It could be their white hits, it could be their specials, what have you, even dots. It just generates extra rage. And then looking at defensive stance. Defensive stance has changed a lot from the way it is on live. And you used to have to stance quite a bit if you played Fury, or even if you played Arms. And by that I mean defensive stance is now a straight up damage reduction. And something to note is you can be in defensive stance and still use all of your abilities. It's not nearly as restrictive as it was on live. On live servers, basically what would happen is you go into defensive stance and get locked out of half of your abilities, and that would actually cause your action bars and different apparatuses to change. That's no longer the case anymore, so you have to be kind of careful with the way you're setting up your action bars and your tools, because there is no switching from action bar 1 to 2 just by switching stances anymore. Sure, you can macro it in, so there's different abilities, it automatically switches to bar 2 or something like that. But the general rule of thumb here would be that it doesn't just automatically switch. Now, defensive stance is it's kind of an oh crap button. Basically what happens in defensive stance is you start taking 15% reduced damage, and you only gain 1 rage every 3 seconds. Now, this is not based off of your auto attacks. It's not based off of you taking damage. As long as you're still in combat, you'll generate 1 rage every 3 seconds. Now, that isn't particularly good, considering some of our abilities cost 30 rage. Some of them can only be triggered while in rage, etc. So you want to be careful about how you use your defensive stance. Now, you can keep your rage going with bloodthirst, charges, etc. But you just need to be aware that when you're in defensive stance, your rage generation is pretty minuscule. You're going to notice it. So personally, myself, when I play the warrior, I trigger defensive stance when I'm just trying to avoid damage, not when I'm trying to DPS somebody. But then again, like I said, it's very dependent on situational things. So now that I've gone over the stances, we need to go over the abilities and what's really changed. Now, there is a What's Changed tab, but some of this isn't necessarily, I don't want to say it's incorrect, but it doesn't give you the full story. And by that I mean, we have to actually take a look at the spells to see that. So what's changed as far as our spells? Well, a lot of things have changed. Since there is no more spec-specific, stance-specific stuff, really, the only restrictors that we have is, like, shield wall needing a shield. The game's kind of changed up a little bit. So, let's take a look at the talents. Now, what you're going to see, not the talents, but the spellbook. We're taking a look at the spellbook here, and you're going to notice that all these abilities, either they have nothing under them, meaning they can be used in any stance, or they tell you what spec you have to be to use them. So you can see here, Bloodthirst is for Fury, Colossus Smash can be used in Arms and Fury, Die by the Swords, Arms and Fury, but not defensive, or not protection. And anything with the word talent on it is something that you have to elect and choose, like Staggering Shout is a talent. And then, of course, each spec of the warrior has its own individual unique abilities, like Raging Blow is a Fury exclusive ability. But what you're really going to notice here when you're looking through your spellbook is there's some things that you have access to that you would used to have to stance for, and one of those things that's pretty crucial to take note of, and I have to find it quick. It's actually back here. It's abilities like Disarm, that used to be a defensive stance only ability, is now able to be used in Arms, Fury, or Protection. You don't have to stance for this. It's lit up, ready to go anytime you want it. It's just on a cooldown now. I'm trying to think of some other defense or other protection only abilities that we could use. Probably most notably would be that Shield Wall. Used to require you to go into defensive stance, and I still do personally, just because it flows better with the way I play, but there is a much faster way to use shield wall than I do, and I'll go over that. This is probably going to be a multi-part video, but just taking a look at the basic abilities, you can kind of get a sense of what we're working with. Something that you definitely want to be paying attention to when you're looking through your spellbook are your passives. Passive talents are things that are out of your control that either proc or happen naturally through the course of combat. And you'll be wanting to keep your eye out for this kind of stuff. Particularly like Blood Surge. Your Bloodthirst hits have a 20% chance of lowering the global cooldown of Wild Strikes, etc. So it kind of tells you a little bit about what your rotation is going to be just by reading these talents. But you need to read them yourselves very carefully as you're going in. And kind of make up your own mind about what you want. So next thing we're going to be looking at are the... oh, here's the core abilities page. Charge, Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, Wild Strike, Execute. But the next thing we're going to be looking at is talents and glyphs. What kind of things can you set yourself up with? Now, I'm going to tell you what I personally set myself up with. But all of these things are pretty dependent on how you like to play personally. Now, some things could most definitely be said, this is for PvP, this is for PvE, etc. But not really at the same time. It's very much preferential on how you like to play the game. So when you're setting up your talents, you need to be thinking about how you're going to play and what classes you're going to play. Now, something new that they did put in, and I'm going to show you this really quickly, is that you can look at other classes' talent builds to the T and see what they're using and read them carefully, and you'll know how to set your own talents up. So when you go to set up your talents, you need to base it off of either who you're fighting or what your role is going to be in the battlegrounds, or what your role is going to be in raid if you're watching this and you're a PvE player. Like personally, right now, the spec I'm running is Double Time, Enrage Regen, Staggering Shout, Blade Storm, Mass Spell Reflect, Avatar. I do not always run this, but this is what I'm running at the moment. Now, just for a hypothetical situation, let's say I was going to be doing some PvE talent builds, I'm probably going to keep Enrage Regeneration. But if I'm doing PvE talent builds, Piercing Howl to slow mobs, I'm going to keep Blade Storm for AoE phases. I'm going to lose Mass Spell Reflection, or I may keep it. Chances are you're going to lose it because most boss spells aren't reflectable to start with. But you could put it into Vigilance if you want to help keep some of the damage off the tank during a high damage phase. You could use Safeguard if you need to intercept a tank, that way you can take less damage, etc. And then the last talent build. Now, it could be argued that these talents were built for PvP, but I'm going to point something out to you that you probably wouldn't notice otherwise. Now, if you're looking for utility and PvP mechanics, Avatar is probably the best choice out of all these talents. Simply because it makes you immune to movement and parrying effects, etc. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a practical application in raid, because it is a 20% damage increase. Perhaps in some of the raids there's going to be a boss that slows you down, etc. But something should be noted is that Bloodbath, no matter how bad you may think this talent is kind of a PvE talent. It could be used for PvP. I don't personally use it because I like my utility. But, when you break it down to its most simple component, this is legitimately just a 30% damage increase every minute. So it's definitely a PvE-oriented talent, but there's no reason it couldn't be used in PvP. And then Stormbolt. Now, a lot of people have argued this is meant only for PvP. Well, I'm telling you right now it's not, simply because it does 300% weapon damage against targets who are permanently immune to stuns. So this is probably going to be used by tanks when they're hitting bosses, etc. So then, that brings us to the final thing we're going to be looking at, and that is your glyphs. Now, the glyphs are way interesting. Now, for some classes, of course, some of these are going to be set up in a cookie cutter fashion where, like, this glyph is for PvP, this glyph's for PvE, and one of those glyphs for the warrior has to be the glyph of gag order. Your heroic throw and pummel silences the target for 3 seconds. While it could be argued this could be used in dungeons and such, in all reality, it's a PvP talent. That's just the way I feel about it personally, but that's up to you. So when you're looking at your talents, again, when you're looking at your glyphs, like your talents, again, it's all down to personal preference. How do you play? Do you move a lot? Do you need to stun multiple targets? There's the glyph of blitz, etc. And I can't really give you too much advice on these glyphs other than to tell you what I'm using. And I really wouldn't suggest you copy what I'm using because I play completely different from you. And I play completely different from the next guy. But probably one of the essential glyphs that all warriors are going to end up picking up is the glyph of gag order, because it's a PvP-oriented glyph to help you take out casters, etc. Now, the other glyphs I use the glyph of bloodthirst, increases the healing of bloodthirst by 100%. Now, that might sound really, really good, but since bloodthirst only heals you for 1% of your life, now it only heals you for 2% of your life. Not like a super amazing glyph, but, you know, it's whatever. And then, you know, I've got the glyph of hindering strikes. Hindering strikes, your hurt, strike, and cleave reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 8 seconds. Just because of the way I've actually got my talent set up with, usually with staggering shout, I don't really need piercing howl because I have access to my hamstring, I have access to the hurt strike, which are going to slow them. So, you know, I'm not really concerned about that. And then on top of that, staggering shout can root them to the ground if I absolutely need it. So, as I said before, glyphs are either they're purely aesthetic minor glyphs, or it's up for interpretation personally, with the way you play. So that's going to be it for part 1 of this guide. Now, stay tuned for part 2, which will be coming out tomorrow night, either tonight or tomorrow night, and I'll be going over cooldowns, and then I'll be going over the DPS rotation, and then probably part 3 of the video is going to be talking about duels versus other classes and what you're looking at in that respect. I'll also be covering your role in Battlegrounds. This video is part of the Wave Movement, a career path in video, sponsored by TGN. To learn more, please visit tgn.tv.